awake? Hmm? Oh, you can't sleep. Do you want me to read to you? Oh, it's just this article on Marcia Lucas. She was George Lucas's first wife and his editor. She actually won an Academy Award for editing the first Star Wars in 1977. She was a fabulous editor. She was also the supervising editor for Taxi Driver. But for Star Wars, she was responsible for so many of the best parts of that original film. It's actually a pretty sad story, what happened between her and George. He never gave her much credit. Well, you didn't know me when I was 14. I had all the action figures. I had all the books. I had a subscription to Star Wars Insider magazine. Yep. My mom took me with her on a business trip to DC when the Smithsonian was running their Star Wars exhibit. Oh man, I was enchanted. But yeah, I guess I don't really talk about Star Wars that much. Yeah, they've made a lot of shows now. I've caught a few episodes here and there, but I haven't seen most of them. Huh. Well, in my heart, I feel like I do still like Star Wars. I mean, that's not even doing it justice. I love Return of the Jedi, the third movie. I watched that so many times when I was a kid. And we taped it off TV, so our version had a bunch of scenes cut out, and we had to fast forward through the commercials. When they re-released the films as special editions, I was really thrown off because I was so used to where the commercial breaks were. But if I really consider it, I haven't loved a Star Wars movie since, I don't know, 1997? Because the prequels, it's so funny how much kids who grew up with those just love them. They're bad movies. Like, objectively, they're terrible. But the internet has just reclaimed these things. And that's fine. You know, I unabashedly love the first 5 Fast and Furious movies. It's okay to like bad movies. It's okay to like any movie. But they are bad. Like, unquestionably bad. Yeah. I think most of my friends felt so betrayed by Lucas with those movies. Yeah, betrayed. I know it's a strong word. You have none of the crackling dialogue of Lawrence Kasdan, none of the artistry of the matte paintings and tangible sets. You have this muddled conspiracy plot and wooden dialogue and CGI that looked dodgy even at the time. And then the new ones came out, you know, the Disney ones. I will say this. I like The Last Jedi a lot. The second one that Disney put out. But the internet, oh man, it hates that movie. Like, you remember when Donald Trump was elected and it just felt like, really? Have I misjudged America that badly? Is it really that bad that people are just so filled with hate and bigotry and meanness that they'd elect this awful, awful human being? I know. I know I shouldn't compare a space opera to a very real political monster, but it was around the same time that that was all happening, and I was just so confused. This was a movie where it seemed like new Star Wars was really willing to be new, and people hated it for that. They hated it so much that Disney walked back pretty much every plot point in their next film, which, if you ask me, is a baffling thing to do for a movie that made $1.3 billion at the box office, but what do I know? Anyway, the last movie was a travesty, and Disney's output hasn't really wowed me since. What makes it bad? You know, I don't think their movies and shows are bad. They're just empty. They're products. I mean, I could go really into detail about what's missing, but that's true. We are trying to get you back to sleep. Well, okay. I can try to explain the disconnect. How I fell out of love with Star Wars. Okay. So, my father died when I was very young. You know that. And he really liked Star Wars. And like I said, we had Return of the Jedi copied to a VHS. I didn't grow up with the original Star Wars, which they later retitled to A New Hope. And I didn't grow up with Empire Strikes Back. I just had this fuzzy copy of the last film in a trilogy that I watched over and over and over again. I had to piece together how we got there from all of the context clues in the movie. So I knew that Lando was Han Solo's friend. I knew that Darth Vader was Luke's father. That was never a secret or a big reveal. I knew there was a first Death Star because they built a second Death Star. But as a kid, none of the plot really mattered because what that movie is full of is oodles of crazy puppets and spaceships and laser swords. I mean, that is the coolest thing that's ever been in a movie. And we know that's true because every time they make a new Star Wars, it's just wall-to-wall lightsabers, right? It's so cool. It's so cool. And my favorite color's always been green, but I've been watching this movie for so long that I could not tell you if that was true before I saw the movie or if Luke's lightsaber is what ignited it. And the color of his saber in that movie is such a lush, vibrant green. It looks amazing when it's clashing with Vader's crimson lightsaber. It's gorgeous. That's still the best fight in the series. Probably always will be. And my relationship to the series is different from most fans, I think, because most fans will tell you the coolest guy in the original trilogy is Han Solo. But that was never true for me, because all I'm watching is Return of the Jedi, and Han Solo doesn't really do much in that movie. It's Luke who's the hero, who's always been my hero, who's so damn cool. He shows up all in black, he's got a robot hand, he's a Jedi, and he wants to save his father. There's a rebellion going on. The fate of the galaxy is in the balance. But he leaves his friends. He leaves the mission because he wants to save his father. No other Star Wars movie has that. And yeah, it's silly. It's a silly series about space wizards. But at its very core, its beating heart, is this story about a kid who never knew his father, who finds out he's dag nasty evil, and still won't give up on him. Because he's not gone. He's right there. And Luke would rather save Darth Vader and know him than kill him and save the galaxy from all the hate and suffering he's put it through. Even Yoda, this wise 900-year-old Jedi Master, who's supposedly a man of peace, tells Luke, kill your father. And Luke says no. He won't do it. As an old cinephile now, I can tell you that there are some real story and pacing issues with Return of the Jedi. But for my money, the third act of that movie is just a rip-snorting good time. And everything that has to do with Luke and Vader and the Emperor is perfect. The dialogue between them, it means something. It means something to me. And I know it's hard to imagine this because we're so saturated with Star Wars today, but there was a time when there were just 3 movies. I mean, 5 if you count the 2 Ewok movies, but we don't. But we did have a lot of cool books, and a lot of so-so books, that added to the amazing world George Lucas originally envisioned. And some of those books were written by great authors, and they took these characters on wild journeys that built on what came before. And before we had prequels or sequels, you could sit around with your friends and talk for hours about what we imagined came next, or what came before, in the years before the Skywalker saga. Because the Force was magical. Again, I know I'm comparing this to a big, real foundational thing, and it is a silly series about space wizards. But I feel about the Force how I used to feel about my religion. The way it's talked about in that movie, in Jedi, it's alive. It's not just telekinesis or the ability to sense things, it's the universe breathing, seeing, hearing. It was mystical in a way that it's not anymore. In the late 90s, when the news that a new Star Wars movie was coming out and that it would be a prequel, I was over the moon. I had my subscription to Star Wars Insider, so I was reading articles about the production every month, literally every month. I begged my mom to buy me any film magazine that had an interview with George, or the actors, or the makeup artists. It was beyond huge. And then it came out in 99, and I didn't hate The Phantom Menace, but I was confused. It didn't feel like Star Wars. And it has Anakin Skywalker in it, but he was a little kid. And I was thinking, well, wait a second. I thought this new trilogy was about how this great Jedi Knight falls to the dark side. If he's a kid now, you're only giving yourself 2 movies to tell this epic tragedy of an angel's fall from grace to become the Prince of Hell, basically. Unfortunately, telling that kind of story was beyond George Lucas's depth. And what became clearer with the second and third films was that George is a great ideas guy. Look no further than Indiana Jones for proof of that. He did the stories for those movies, but Steven Spielberg, wisely, got a writer to actually write them. And that was the case for Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. George wrote and directed the first one, but he got other people to write and direct the other 2. Obviously, his hand was on the wheel for both of those movies, more so for Jedi than Empire, which is a whole thing I won't even get into. But all you have to do is look at 5 minutes of the prequels and any 5 minutes of those movies, and you'll see George shouldn't have directed. And he really shouldn't have written them. And I don't want to bash him. George Lucas remains an important filmmaker, and the fact that he gives so much of his money to charity is inspiring, honestly. I respect him for many reasons, but where his film legacy is concerned, he did make the wrong call. The prequels are wrong. The plots are contrived, the characters are paper thin, Anakin Skywalker is a whiny asshole, and he doesn't even talk right. I mean, listen to how Darth Vader talks in the original trilogy. Yes, I'm going to talk about this. He's like this archaic Shakespearean weirdo, and no one else talks like that. So either he put on the weirdest front when he put on the mask, or he was raised by some kind of space Amish way out in the space sticks, and I was really looking forward to seeing that. Like, here's an example. In Return of the Jedi, when Luke tells his father that he won't turn evil, Vader throws his lightsaber at him and says something like, "If you will not fight, then you will meet your destiny." No one else talks like that. Not even the Emperor. Vader's just this big galoot who makes these big, epic pronouncements, which I am not criticizing. When you have the voice of James Earl Jones, you use it to the fullest extent. That was the right way to use it. But the prequels, they all ignore this. And it's a small thing. I understand, it's a small thing. I don't think anybody else cares about this but me. But I do care, and I do wonder about it, like, a lot. I think about this a lot. Why does he talk like that? In my mind, I had such a richer, more mature story built up for how Anakin and Obi-Wan ended up on opposite ends of the Force. And even that, the impression you get in the original trilogy is that the Jedi weren't super visible to ordinary people. They were an order of knights, protectors of the Republic, but not like an arm of the government. Han Solo calls it a hokey religion, which, when you watch the prequels, they happened like less than 20 years before that. So, okay, I'll give you an example. From watching the original movies, I never got the impression the Jedi had a designated government headquarters, like the DMV, or rigid rules about how young a person had to be trained as a Jedi. Like, Yoda says that Luke is too old to be trained in Empire Strikes Back, but that just sounds like he's making an excuse, like he doesn't want to train Luke. And I never thought that they had these monastic rules about celibacy or personal attachments. One of the best parts of the expanded universe, the books that came out after the trilogy, was a character named Mara Jade. Now, she's a former Sith. She was an apprentice to the Emperor, and she ends up marrying Luke after failing to assassinate him. And it's beautiful. They have this great relationship. She's a total badass. And if the Force is all about balance and harmony of the universe, it doesn't make sense to me at all that the Jedi should cut themselves off from those deep emotional connections. Yes, passion can turn aggressive, but it also fuels beautiful things. After all, Jedi were described as knights, not monks. But in the prequels, that's exactly what they are. And not only that, but the Force is some byproduct of these microscopic bugs that live in your blood. It was wrong. It felt wrong, I should say, because as much as I can criticize George Lucas, it is his universe. I can't fault him for having ideas. At least he had ideas, stories he was trying to tell. When Disney took over, they did the same thing that any studio does with a popular franchise. They rehashed all the stuff that worked before. They took as few risks as possible. They froze all the classic characters in amber, like decades of life hadn't changed them. And they treated Chewbacca like a pet. Chewbacca is Han Solo's big, hairy alien buddy. He's a person, but he looks like a dog. And he doesn't speak English. But he is sentient. He's Han Solo's friend and co-pilot. And if you watch Disney's films, they never treat him like anything other than fuzzy furniture. I'll just say one more thing about this, and then I'll drop it. Princess Leia's known Chewbacca for decades, right? And after Han Solo dies in The Force Awakens, she goes to hug this girl she's known for all of 5 minutes and literally lets Chewie take a walk. All you needed to do to make that film good was have her hug Chewie and the two of them cry together, because that's what you do with friends you care about. Again, I know it's stupid to fixate on a Wookiee like this, but it bothers me. Because I'm invested, you know? Chewie cares about Han. There's a moment in Return of the Jedi when Han has been unfrozen from carbonite. Chewbacca hasn't seen him for at least 1 year, probably more. And he just grabs him and he hugs him and he makes this plaintive little noise, like a little moan, a little howl, and he rubs his head, and Han Solo says, it's all right, buddy. It's okay. I'm all right. And because they're friends, And the way Disney treated Chewbacca, it's one of those subtle things that shows the filmmakers cared more about the style than the substance. But I don't really want to beat up on Disney too much. It's not Disney's fault that I, lost the faith. I started falling out of love with Star Wars when Attack of the Clones came out. Ever since Phantom Menace, I'd had a creeping, uncomfortable suspicion that it wasn't what I wanted. And then, when the second prequel arrived, it was so poorly written, so hollow, so counter to what I'd imagined, that it soured my enthusiasm for the series as a whole. But, and it must be said, that movie came out in 2002. Where was I in 2002? I was in high school. I was acting in plays. I was dating. I was growing up. I didn't play with toys anymore. I wasn't reading Star Wars books anymore. I remember vividly seeing the last of the prequels, Revenge of the Sith, because it was my last year of high school. It was towards the end of the school year, and I was going through a bad breakup at the time. Like the bad high school breakup. I was already in a bad mood. And remember, I thought the whole prequel trilogy was going to be about Anakin Skywalker, the best star pilot in the galaxy, a charismatic and powerful Jedi Knight falling to the dark side. Instead, that fall occurs over, conservatively, a minute of screen time. Because an obviously evil dude makes an obviously false promise, and then Anakin immediately goes to the Jedi Temple to murder children. It's insane. Watching the original trilogy, Darth Vader's bad. He killed people. Like, he watches an entire planet get destroyed and feels nothing. But to go from a paragon of virtue to using his lightsaber to murder children in less time than it's taken me to explain this, to this day, I still don't understand how the fandom just accepts that. It's such fundamentally bad storytelling. It's insulting and upsetting. And let's remember, this is the same lightsaber that Obi-Wan gifts to Luke in the original movie. It's like, here you go, buddy. No taint on that romantic weapon. No, sirree. It used to belong to my good pal Annie Skywalker. Like, if you told a story that showed me how Anakin resented the Jedi for their dogmatic ways and how, over time, he'd been persuaded that the Jedi were a corrupting influence on the Republic that needed to be torn out by the root, yes, I can see how you draw a line from point A to B. But what you have in the prequels, the latter two, is a whiny guy who resents not being quote-unquote powerful enough, whatever that means, and just... There was no spirituality to the prequels. No discussion of what the Force is, or why it is, or why the Jedi would choose this life. They just exist. It's taken for granted that they exist. And the plot's all wrapped up in this ridiculous trade federation political something or other that makes no sense to us, the audience, and is just an excuse to get the Emperor in power at the end of the third movie. There are interesting ideas that could have been handled more elegantly. Again, Lucas, great idea, guy. Instead you have Yoda ping-ponging around with a lightsaber, which is also just egregious. Yoda was impressive in the original series because he was wise, not a warrior. I didn't want to see him fight. If nothing else in Attack of the Clones could convince me George didn't get the magic of his own movies, that sealed the deal. So I dislike the prequels because they felt wrong, and I dislike the newer Star Wars films because they feel right, but they're empty calories. J.J. Abrams directed The Force Awakens, and it does look and sound like a Star Wars movie. But that's because it's just recycling every story beat from the original film. There's another Empire, another set of stormtroopers, another rebellion, another evil Jedi killing his older mentor. And the series is called Star Wars. It's about, in part, the cyclical nature of war and conflict. But there was a better way to tell that story. It didn't need to be the exact same story as the original trilogy. No one's really grown. No one's really changed. I don't hate it. I can't even complain that it's become homogenized or corporatized because Lucas himself was an industry. Merchandising has always been a driving force of this IP. One thing I do appreciate about Disney's version of Star Wars is that it places women and people of color front and center, when they really weren't before. But once again, I find myself being shouted down by the internet, or large portions of it, that seem to view this as being too woke. And that makes me sad. Again, I don't want to conflate Star Wars with more important issues, but the internet has done a real good job of showing me how dangerously little empathy there is in the world right now. How can you enjoy a movie or a show about magical space knights that believe in an all-encompassing force and then get mad that a girl is the main character? Girls deserve to be the main character. People of different colors, different genders, different beliefs deserve to be part of this universe. I think, and I don't know if this is true, but I wonder if some of this righteous anger so many Star Wars nerds have, myself included from time to time, is really because we're just mad it doesn't make us feel like it used to. It doesn't make us feel like when we were kids. But the thing is, nothing feels like that. My kids jump for joy at each new day. They watch the exact same TV shows and movies every single day, and they love it every single time. You don't feel like that forever. It doesn't matter if it's Star Wars or apple juice or a bump of cocaine. You get older. You get tired. But I still have Return of the Jedi. I still have that moment when Darth Vader tells Luke that he saved him, that he did it. And it's okay that he dies, because he got to look at his son with his own eyes. That is a beautiful moment. And it means more to me than any scene in any film on the AFI's Top 100. It always will. And I love that. That's what Star Wars means to me. To me and my father. I know you fell asleep a while ago, but thanks for letting me get that off my chest. The Force will be with you. Always.